Camera speed.
Sound production, take one.
Action!
Welcome to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. If you love old movies, Hollywood history, or the golden age of filmmaking, you've come to the right place. This is the podcast that talks about amazing stories of Tinseltown from another era. Hear fascinating conversations with writer-producer Steve Cubine, who quite literally lives just beneath the Hollywood sign, and actress-writer Nan McNamara. Now your hosts, Steve and Nan.
Welcome, everybody. We're excited to have part 2 of our special series on The Wizard of Oz. And as we discussed last week, we talked about the book, we talked about the script, we talked about the multiple directors, the special effects, the mishaps on set. Well, this week, we're going to discuss the score, the songs, the vocals, the transitions to television, and some of the many urban legends that surround this classic film.
Well, let's start with the score. So Herbert Stothart actually won an Academy Award for Best Original Score for The Wizard of Oz, but he had nothing to do with any of the songs in this film. All of them were written by Harold Arlen and E.Y. Yip Harburg. Under today's Academy rules, the Oscar would have gone to all three.
Yeah, it's so unfair. And when you think about it, yeah.
Stothart was referred to as the dean of the MGM music department. He was essentially their house composer. At that time, every studio had 3 or 4 house composers on staff whose job it was to write the scores for the studio's dramatic films. They called themselves screen composers, but in kind of a snarky little thing, songwriters would refer to them as background music men.
Ooh.
According to Murray Cutter, who arranged and orchestrated the songs for Oz, Stothart was a good showman, a gifted musician with very little technical knowledge, which is really interesting when you think of the job he was responsible for. Many at the time felt that he wasn't in the same league as Max Steiner, who that same year scored the tiny little film Gone with the Wind. And Steiner would lose the Oscar that year to Stothart. But don't feel too sorry for Steiner because he won 3 Oscars over his career and garnered over 20 Academy Award nominations.
Wow. Well, George Bassman, Murray Cutter, Paul Marquardt, and Ken Darby were given screen credit for orchestral and vocal arrangements. George Stoll was credited as associate conductor. However, Bassman, Stoll, and Robert Stringer composed several short pieces of incidental music, including the music for the Deadly Poppy Field scene.
Stothart borrowed liberally from classical composers. So all you classical music fans, give a listen to the scored music the next time you watch the film. And you're going to hear Schumann's The Happy Farmer, which is used in the opening scene on the farm. Felix Mendelssohn's Opus 16, number 2, known as Toto's theme, which is when Toto escapes from the witch's castle. And then Modest Mussorgsky's Night on Bald Mountain is also known as Dorothy's Rescue, and it's heard in that climax of the film. So when you go back and you pick out those pieces of music on YouTube or wherever you listen, it's amazing what he stole.
Well, George Bassman wrote the music for The Cyclone, which lasts only 1.5 minutes on screen, but Bassman worked on it for 3 weeks. For this piece of music alone, 90 instruments were used.
Wow.
50 would have been more common. There were 6 French horns, 4 trumpets, 4 trombones, and 30 violins. When Bassman finished writing the score for each of these instruments, the score was 60 pages long for 1.5 minutes on screen. So, of course, edits had to be made. Well, the next time you watch the film, listen to the themes that depict the various characters as they go by Dorothy's window in The Cyclone. Very interesting.
Associate producer Arthur Freed was instrumental in deciding who was going to be hired to write the songs for The Wizard of Oz. Listeners will probably know Freed's name as the co-writer of such movie musical standards as Singin' in the Rain, Broadway Rhythm, and You Are My Lucky Star with Nacio Herb Brown. And as a producer, Freed would win 2 Oscars for Best Picture, An American in Paris in 1951 and Gigi in 58. But back in the 20s, when he was first starting out, Arthur Freed was just this uncredited film writer and lyricist. He eventually landed a job under contract as a lyricist to MGM in 28. Once at MGM, Freed Freed repeatedly pressed studio chief Louis B. Mayer for a chance to produce. He wanted to be a producer so badly that he took a pay cut of $1,200. Well, Mayer gave him a chance on The Wizard of Oz. Pretty good first credit,
I was going to say, not a bad way to out the gate.
He was hired as associate producer and assistant to producer Mervyn LeRoy. Now, LeRoy was very experienced already at this point as a producer, but not necessarily with musicals, so he allowed Freed pretty much free rein in terms of hiring the writing team for the songs. Freed had been really impressed with Jay Gorney and E.Y. Yip Harburg's song, Brother, Can You Spare a Dime, which was an anthem of sorts during the Depression.
Yeah.
So Freed first reached out to Harburg to write the lyrics. Harburg was very interested, and Harburg remembered this great collaboration that he had with a composer by the name of Harold Arlen.
Only him.
Only him. They worked on a Broadway review called Life Begins at 8:40, which was during the season on Broadway 1934 to 35. They also worked on another show called The Show Is On, 36 to 37, and Hooray for What, which we'll come back later to, in 37, 38. So by the time they started working together on Oz, they were close friends and pretty comfortable collaborators.
Well, Freed reportedly considered some other teams, including Jerome Kern and Ira Gershwin or Dorothy Fields, but Kern was recovering from a heart attack and unable to commit. Well, Freed's choice of Arlen and Harburg was partly because he trusted Harburg's judgment, but also because Freed enjoyed a song the two had written together for the Broadway musical Hooray for What, called In the Shade of the New Apple Tree, designed to be sung as an old English madrigal. Freed would tell Harburg and Arlen more than once that the tone of the song was the tone he wanted for the movie, which is so cool.
It is cool. Harburg and Arlen were hired in May of 38 with a 14-week contract at $25,000 with 1/3 advance against royalties. So when they started, the script was 4 months away from its final form. The only actor that was cast at that time was Judy Garland. Since the songwriting team was there at the beginning, it really helped them be able to influence the way the story was going to be told.
How rare that they do that.
It's so rare. They wrote an integrated score in which the songs helped reveal the character and move the plot forward, something that Arthur Freed would later be given credit for contributing to movie musicals. So in other words, the songs weren't just songs that stopped the action. They were part of advancing the story. Of course, Oz wasn't the first musical to do this. On Broadway, Showboat had already opened in 1927 with songs by Jerome Kern and Oscar Hammerstein II, and that had really been the trailblazer for this kind of storytelling in musicals.
Arlen and Harburg first tackled what Arlen called the lemon drop songs.
I love that.
I know, I love this too. And these were those sort of light songs that were emotionally kind of undemanding and somewhat easier to compose. Songs like Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead, We're Off to See the Wizard, and The Merry Old Land of Oz. Moving on to another song, my song I should call it.
Yeah.
Since I did portray the Scarecrow in my school production.
You recall, he mentioned that multiple times
Did I happen to mention that? If I Only Had a Brain and a Heart and the Nerve, which of course are the songs that the Tin Man and the Scarecrow and the Lion sing, they came from the songwriter trunk that Harburg and Arlen had written for the Broadway musical that was mentioned earlier, Hooray for What, in 1937, under the title, I'm Hanging On to You. But the song was never used, so they just used it, recycled it, and the rest is history.
Harburg and Arlen would discuss as a team the meaning of each song in advance. I love sort of hearing their process because I think it's different with every writing team, whether it's music or a script. Before any lyrics were written, Arlen would come up with the first 8 or so bars. Harburg would listen to them, then come up with the title, and then Arlen would complete the music for the song before Harburg started writing the lyrics. Arlen rarely wrote at the piano. He waited for inspiration to hit. So he'd be at the store or on the golf course and he would jot down a few notes. He kept a little notebook with him, and then he would later sit at the piano and develop the tune. Harburg would sit in the room with him, and Arlen would play the song over and over and over and over again. And eventually, Harburg is quoted as saying he could hear the words.
Oh, I love that.
I
love that. The Lemon Drop songs, they came easily to Arlen. It's the ballads that were a little tougher nut to crack. And it's the hardest song because, as Harburg said, it's pure melody. In addition, it's the song you want everyone to hum after the movie's over. So it's very important to get these songs right. Well, Harburg and Arlen agreed that the ballad in Oz would be, and this is a quote, a song of yearning. Its object would be to delineate Dorothy and to give an emotional touch to the scene where she is frustrated and in trouble.
Well, after a week-long struggle on this ballad, The melody came to Arlen as he went to Grauman's Chinese Theater in Hollywood to see a movie with his wife. The Chinese Theater was opposite or near Schwab's drugstore, even then known for turning good-looking people into movie stars. And he told his wife, stop the car, so he could write down this tune. He's quoted as saying, "It was as if the Lord said, well, here it is. Now stop worrying about it."
I love that. When he first played the tune for Harburg, Harburg was visibly disappointed. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Arlen had played the tune for Harburg in a very majestic, serious way, so Harburg thought the song was too old for the character of Dorothy, which makes sense. The two then asked Ira Gershwin to come over and listen, at which point Arlen played the song with less importance, more tentative, since his confidence had been shaken by Harburg's critical reaction. Well, Harburg then heard it differently and changed his mind in favor of the song. Gershwin loved it, and praise from Caesar.
Well, Arlen still needed a bridge. With Harburg's encouragement, he began whistling in the manner that he whistled for his dog, whose name was Pan. And very shortly, he had the melodic line that Harburg later augmented with the words, "Someday I'll wish upon a star," which you can just hear him whistling that,
can just
right?
hear it, yeah.
Here's a clip of Arlen and Harburg discussing their collaboration.
If you sing dee 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 da 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 da, you won't do what I just did. You will subconsciously think of Somewhere Over the Rainbow or sing it or some phrase in it. And those little phrases are what make not just those little phrases, those are the memorable things that stand out and cling to a song and make it a happy wedding.
The lyrics are the wings to the music, and the music are the wings to the lyrics. Without it, they're clay-footed and they lie on the ground.
Two people get together and have an idea. Now, it has to be wedded perfectly.
I'd say Somewhere Over the Rainbow is wedded pretty perfectly.
Indeed.
That's from a documentary about Arlen called Somewhere Over the Rainbow, Harold Arlen, 1999, directed by Don McGlynn.
Once Arlen had finished with the music, it was time for Harburg to write the words. Harburg said, and this is a quote, "This little girl thinks, my life is messed up. Where do I run? The song has to be full of childish pleasure, of lemon drops. The book had said Kansas was an arid place where not even flowers grew. The only colorful thing Dorothy saw occasionally would be the rainbow. A rainbow gave us a visual reason for going to a new land, for changing to color." I love that.
So Over the Rainbow was actually cut from the film by Louis B. Mayer after the first preview.
Can you imagine?
No, I cannot.
Yeah.
Our fabulous executive producer, Lindsay Schnebley, talked about that very thing on a tour stop in episode 69 of this podcast. So Harburg, Arlen, and Freed, they're at this preview, and these executives come up and they say, we got to cut that song. They are outraged. I mean, to them, it's not just a pretty song. It sets up the whole film, and it really does.
And it does set up the film.
Yes, but the producers were complaining, why does she sing in a barnyard? So clearly they had no clue.
No vision.
The importance that the song held to the story. There are differing accounts of how the song returned to the film, but as Lindsay reported, and from multiple sources that I found in doing my research, the song was cut more than once at various stages in the preview process. It would be cut and put back in, and cut and put back in. But Arthur Freed is credited with having it return to the film after pleading and shouting at Louis B. Mayer.
Wow.
They must have had a pretty good relationship for him to be able to do
shout
that.
at Louis B. Mayer and get away with it.
Yeah.
Well, Over the Rainbow would, of course, go on to win Arlen and Harburg the Academy Award for Best Song. So there you have it.
Not too shabby.
And, of course, both men would write songs with other partners that are part of the great American songbook of the 20th century.
A couple of additional songs that didn't make it into the film. Harburg and Arlen started to write Horse of a Different Color, but realized there was already too much music during that entrance to Emerald City, so that was cut. An elaboration of We're Out of the Woods was dropped, as was most of the song Lions and Tigers and Bears. And then one major song was deleted from the score entirely when a scene involving an attack of jitterbugs, which were these pink and blue mosquitoes that Harburg had created, was cut due to time. The intent of the song was for a bug that gives you the jitters, but the advent of the jitterbug dance craze was happening, and it changed the meaning completely.
Oh, how interesting. Yeah.
So that scene had already been shot. Took 5 weeks, $80,000. Cut. If you watch the film now, you will hear the Wicked Witch, when she sends the flying monkeys off to get Dorothy, you'll notice her say the line, "They'll give you no trouble, I promise you that. I've sent a little insect on ahead to take the fight out of them." That's a reference to the jitterbugs.
I have never picked up on that.
Well,
That's
watch it
interesting.
again.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
That's so cool.
It went over my head for years.
We mentioned that Harburg is one of the uncredited writers of the movie. He had influence over the script in terms of integrating the songs into the story. He helped write the lead in to each song, again, helping to move the story along, instead of coming to a dead stop for a musical number, which was the case in many musicals of the day. An example of this, the Auntie M Dorothy dialogue, where Auntie M encourages Dorothy to find yourself a place where you won't get into any trouble. Dorothy wonders out loud, "Some place where there's no trouble. Do you think there is such a place, Toto?" A moment later, the bed of music for Over the Rainbow begins.
It's amazing.
Amazing.
By the way, Baum makes no mention of a rainbow in the book. It's just bright sunshine that floods Dorothy's room after the house has landed in Oz. Before we move into vocals and the transition into television and those urban legends, let's give this week's Hollywood Pop Quiz.
And the pop quiz question this week is, we all know, and we're going to get into this, in 1956, The Wizard of Oz had its TV broadcast debut. When it debuted, who was the host of introducing it, and why were they a last-minute fill-in for someone else?
Great question. We'll be back with the answer and more about The Wizard of Oz after this.
All right, back to the show in just a minute, but first another stop on the Hollywood tour. Now this one's a little weird, but stay with the tour anyway. You may have heard about how The Wizard of Oz synchronizes so well with the Pink Floyd album, Dark Side of the Moon. The phenomenon is sometimes called Dark Side of the Rainbow. Now this idea proposes that playing the album while watching the movie, with the movie's sound muted, creates an apparent alignment between the two. Now even Pink Floyd members, including Alan Parsons, who was the album's engineer, have denied any intentional connection. They suggest the synchronization is purely coincidental. Well, if so, it's an amazing coincidence. So rather than list all the moments here where the film and the album line up, head over to YouTube and search for The Wizard of Pink Floyd. And if you agree it's more than a coincidence, shoot us an email, info@FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com. And now back to Steve and Ann from Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
Welcome back, everybody. Before we get into more Wizard of Oz fun facts, we're going to give a shout out to our listener of the week. And this week, we are honoring Sheila Coleman. Thank you, Sheila, for all the great comments you've left on our YouTube page, and we really appreciate the support.
Thank you, Sheila. Let's dive into talking about the vocals. Ken Darby was an out-of-work singer who had been hired by Stothert in 1937. He had worked on 2 Jeanette MacDonald, Nelson Eddy musicals, but The Wizard of Oz was his first screen credit as vocal arranger, although Roger Edens had overall responsibility. Darby is the one who created the voices for the Munchkins and the Winkies. Did you know that that's the name of the Witches' Guards, is the Winkies?
I did know that because I might have mentioned I was actually in a production of The Wizard of Oz where I played the Scarecrow.
Oh, Lord. Okay. Never going to live that down. So they didn't have the technical capabilities back in the day to speed up sound like we can do now. So Darby had to figure out another way to make the Munchkins sound high-pitched, and it involved some mathematics. He recorded voices at 60 feet per minute instead of 90 feet per minute, which is the standard, with the vocalists singing at a slower pace in a different key. Played back at the normal speed, it would sound right. It would sound high-pitched. And then he reversed this procedure for the low voices of the Winkies, using men with deep voices, recording them at a faster than normal speed.
How clever that
I know.
Figured this out. Well, according to Darby, none of the little people did any of the singing as Munchkins. Among those that actually sang in place of the Munchkins were the King's Men Quartet and 2 3-person female groups, the Debutantes and the Rhythmettes, who sang the Lullaby League and later the Poppyfield song When the Spell is Broken. Darby himself provided the singing voice for the Munchkins' mayor, and the St. Joseph's Choir of St. Joseph's Church in Los Angeles provided the choral voice beneath the Munchkin Land sequence.
Well, We're Off to See the Wizard was actually recorded with Ray Bolger, Bert Lahr, and Buddy Ebsen. the original Tin Woodman. In the film, whenever Dorothy sings the song with her three friends, or when the friends sing it as a trio, you are not hearing Jack Haley. You are hearing Buddy Ebsen. Jack Haley apparently recorded it just once when he sings it with Dorothy and the Scarecrow. And then a final little fun fact, Lorraine Bridges actually dubs the singing for Billy Burke. I think that is a marvel because...
To match that voice?
Oh!
How do you do that?
I had no illusion. I thought it was Billy Burke singing.
I assumed it was Billy Burke with that little trilly voice. Yeah.
Yes.
Shall we move on to television?
Let's talk about television.
Because this is when The Wizard of Oz really caught on fire and really entered our collective consciousness. When it was first released, it didn't really make a profit. And that didn't happen until MGM's first theatrical re-release in 1949. Well, additional profits came from the second re-release in 55, but even then, the public was not exactly clamoring to see The Wizard of Oz. Historians have noted that at the time, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was a bona fide cultural phenomenon, and Wizard of Oz was not. Interesting. Well, television changed all of that, and this is how most people remember watching the movie today. It was a special event, must-see, cannot-miss event that involved the entire family, and it was long before VHS, DVR, and really long before streaming.
Yeah, that's for sure.
I love that.
I just have great memories of watching it at home with
Me
my
too.
family. Yeah.
Loved it.
Well, MGM's first deal for television airings of the film was made with CBS in July of 1956. The contract agreement allowed for 4 showings at a per broadcast cost to CBS of $225,000.
Which I wonder what that was worth
In today's
market.
Yeah, in today's money. Studios other than MGM and even executives within MGM objected to that TV sale. I think they could see the future.
Yes, they
right?
knew that television was about to infringe upon their market.
And theaters at that time had already heavily invested into CinemaScope and stereophonic sound and other upgrades that were designed to meet this threat of television. So they worried that Oz was not going to be the first theatrical film sold to TV, and boy, were they right.
They were, yeah. But Oz did make its TV debut on CBS on Saturday, November the 3rd, 1956. Even though it aired at a late hour, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 53% of all American televisions were tuned in, which equaled about 45 million people in nearly 13 million households.
That is truly amazing.
I know anybody on CBS would kill for numbers like that today.
Oh, yeah. Well, CBS didn't broadcast the film during the 57-58 season, but it aired it again on October 16th, 1959. The numbers were even bigger than in 56. This confirmed theater owners' worst fears. In fact, a study found that the Oz telecast cost a $2 million loss in nationwide theater revenue.
Wow.
Yeah.
Talk about taking a bite out of their revenue.
Oh, yeah.
Oz wasn't broadcast on TV again until 1959, hosted this time by Red Skelton and his daughter. The numbers were even bigger than 1956. Well, the contract for broadcast in 1960 was altered to benefit both CBS and MGM. CBS was given broadcast rights for 1960 through 65, with MGM receiving $200,000 annually. Because color televisions were rare, CBS broadcast the entire film in black and white in 61 and 1962.
As author David J. Hogan notes, Oz might have been broadcast in color early on if the TV rights had been held by NBC as opposed to CBS, because NBC pioneered color TV broadcasting, which was owned by TV manufacturer RCA. Until 1989, the Kansas sequences in TV prints provided by MGM were in black and white and not the original sepia. And when you see the difference,
yes.
Seeing the film with the
Such a
original
difference.
sepia, it changes the tone of that whole world. The black and white is cold and more one-dimensional, whereas sepia has a warmer and richer feel to it.
The CBS airings of the film became the 1960s version of must-see TV. It linked celebrity hosts to the airing. Richard Boone, Dick Van Dyke, Danny Kaye, they were all hosts. Kaye hosted from 1964 to 1967.
During the majority of CBS's airings, they did not show the MGM credits. The screen faded after Dorothy's final line. After a 10-year association with CBS, Oz peaked in its ratings in 1966. It was the #1 show during the week it aired. In 68, it moved back to NBC, played there until 78, with MGM charging $800,000 for an annual broadcast fee. And by that point, they did away with hosts because it ate away from the time they could use to sell commercials.
After Judy Garland's death in June of 1969, the television airing on Sunday, March 15, 1970, attracted the largest audience to date, 64 million viewers.
That's amazing.
And because of the cost of airing, NBC wanted to wring out every penny of the broadcast. They cut about a minute of footage from Dorothy's arrival in Munchkin Land to aid in this. They could sell more ads.
Yeah. Well, in 78, CBS gets it back again, $4 million for 5 broadcasts from 76 to 80, and they cut Oz again.
Ugh.
Editing out parts of the film to make more time for commercials. This time, it was the opening Kansas sequence, including Dorothy and Toto's walk along the empty dirt road, which when you watch the full film, you just think, oh, that's a huge loss. And then a lot of the build-up to the Twister, and then some things were cut out of the poppy field scene as well. And then the opening dedication, which part of which says, "To the young in heart we dedicate this picture," completely removed.
Oh, and I love that.
I know, me
love
too.
that. In 1981, CBS renewed with MGM, agreeing to pay $1 million for each telecast through 1985.
Oh, but how are they going to pay for that? Guess how?
Well, I can only imagine. In 1985, Oz was once again changed to provide more opportunities for the network to make money off of, you guessed it, commercials.
Yes.
Although not in terms of editing the film this time. This time, the film was time compressed. Instead of continuing to cut the film for TV broadcast, which viewers would have noticed since they had seen it regularly for the years building up to this, the network decided to compress the film, allowing for another 30 seconds for one more commercial.
I just think that's just horrific.
Greed.
It's greed, yeah. Of course, in the mid-'80s, video cassettes would become more popular. This cut into the broadcast viewership. And I would say, that advent of VHS, it takes away from that special occasion time when you would get together as a family. All total, TV airings during the first 30 years averaged 26.4 in the ratings. More than 250,000 homes were watching. By 86, because of VHS, Oz had a rating of 18.4. Still, for today's averaging, a really
It's
good
huge
rating.
for today, yeah. By the 90s, the film had numerous networks ready to air it. Once Oz was moved to TCM, the film was restored to its original full-length version, thank God. And if you haven't seen the film in the last 20 to 30 years, watch it again. You may be surprised at what you've missed.
Let's quickly talk about the urban legends.
I love these.
I just had no idea there were so many crazy things.
Crazy.
And if you want to really learn and get into the details, David J. Hogan's book shares a lot of them, but here's one. Producer Mervyn LeRoy approved the casting of Otto, a dachshund owned by Margaret Hamilton to play Dorothy's dog. Garland filmed Over the Rainbow with Otto, not Toto, a dachshund. Otto was replaced because of growing anti-German sentiment in America. The dog was replaced with the terrier that we now call Toto, an anagram of Otto's name. Okay, false or true?
False, 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 false.
Woo! False.
Where did that come from?
I have no idea. It wouldn't have happened because Over the Rainbow was one of the last things to be shot. It just doesn't work that a dog named Otto would have been replaced at the end of the shoot. And Toto is Baum's original name of the dog in the book.
It's in the book, I was going to say.
Yeah.
And they're not going to let some cast member's dog who's not trained come in and play Toto.
Yes, yes.
Another rumor, and this one on a little sadder note, was Clara Blandick, who was the wonderful character actress who played Auntie M. It was rumored that she killed herself because she had been typecast by the Wizard of Oz and had trouble finding work afterwards.
Okay.
Well, the truth is, and sadly, the part about her committing suicide is true,
Yes.
unfortunately, but it wasn't for the reasons that have been rumored. In reality, Blandick's health had been failing. She was battling crippling arthritis that was excruciatingly painful, and her eyesight was beginning to fail. So on April 15th, 1962, after attending Palm Sunday services at her church, she returned home to her apartment, which was at 1735 North Wilcox in Hollywood. If you want to drive by, it's still there. She took out her resume, some favorite photos, and some press clippings from her long career, and she laid them out in her apartment. She then dressed immaculately in this beautiful blue dressing gown. She had her hair beautifully styled. Then she took an overdose of sleeping pills. She laid down, she covered herself with a blanket, and then she placed a plastic bag over her head. So sad. And she left the most harrowing note behind, and it said, and this is a quote, I'm now able to make the great adventure. I cannot endure this agonizing pain any longer. It is all over my body. Neither can I face the impending blindness. I pray the Lord my soul to take. Amen.
Oh,
she was 7 weeks short of her 86th birthday.
God rest her.
Yeah.
God rest her. Well, another crazy rumor, and there are so many down the rabbit hole videos on YouTube about this one. Ooh. Apparently, an unidentified Munchkin hanged himself on the forest set and is visible in the background when the Wicked Witch confronts Dorothy and her friends.
Okay. I love the hanging Munchkin.
All right, I call BS on that.
Totally.
There's actually a lot of variations on the rumor. Sometimes it's a Lollipop Guild Munchkin. One version of it is it's the director's daughter. Neither could possibly be true. This sequence was shot before any of the Munchkins were on set, and director Victor Fleming's daughters were aged 3 and 1 at the time of filming. The figure that you see moving in the background, it's actually a crane that was brought in to add a little color.
Aw, so rumor debunked.
Yeah, another one.
There's also Munchkin rumors, and these are fun. And among some of these rumors, the Munchkins were all drunk.
Right, I heard
The Munchkins
that one.
were all children.
I heard that too.
And my favorite, Elizabeth Taylor actually played a Munchkin.
I had never heard that one until I read it in David Hogan's book. That's amazing.
All right, well, the truth of that, the Munchkins behaved like any other group of adults. Some were loud, some were not.
Some liked wine, some liked beer.
Some liked beer, some didn't drink. The rumor about drinking is most likely traced to Judy Garland sharing Oz stories in a 1967 TV interview. All but a dozen Munchkins were played by adults.
Okay, so that's so they weren't children.
Debunked.
Right.
And Elizabeth Taylor wasn't even under contract at MGM until 1942, which was 3 years after the filming of The Wizard of Oz. She was living in England in 1939 when the movie was made. So Liz Taylor was not a Munchkin.
Yes. Well, there's so much more that we can say. As I mentioned, David Hogan's book, he also has this whole section on mistakes that you can look for in the film, and that happens in every film that's out there. But there's just so much to talk about with this film. We've lived it our whole lives. We've lived with it. We love it. Check it out. You can watch it streaming on Max and others, and it's just worth revisiting in its full form with no compression.
No compression.
And no editing.
We want to see it all. And I'm going to recommend, if you really want to read more about this, I cannot recommend highly enough a book called The Making of the Wizard of Oz, Movie Magic and Studio Power in the Prime of MGM and the Miracle of Production. This is by Algene Harmits.
And she does a fabulous job in that book.
She does such a great job. You really want to go behind the scenes, check out this book.
Yeah, it's a good one. Well, let's revisit what this week's Hollywood Pop Quiz is.
The question was, in 1956, in its TV broadcast, the person that introduced it was actually a last-minute fill-in for somebody else. Who introduced it, and who did they replace?
Well, they introduced the film with Bert Lahr and Garland's 10-year-old daughter, Liza Minnelli. And there was also a 12-year-old Baum expert by the name of Justin G. Schiller, who had his first edition copy of the book in his hand.
That's right. And I love that there's a 12-year-old Baum expert.
I know.
Well, Bert Lahr was a last-minute replacement for Judy Garland, who was originally supposed to introduce the movie, but she changed her mind because of logistic problems and reportedly some anxiety about it.
Yeah. Well, this has just been so fun.
I feel like we've gone over the rainbow.
I think we've walked down the Yellow Brick Road.
Yeah, there's no place like home.
Yeah. I'll get you, my pretty little dog, too. All right. Thanks, everybody, for putting up with us. And please follow us on social media. Our handle is @FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook. You can also watch the podcast on YouTube, and we sure would appreciate those 5-star reviews wherever you listen to your podcasts.
And did I mention that I appeared in a version of The Wizard of Oz? Cut that. Let's cut that. That joke is so old. And we'd love to hear from you, so please send any emails to info@FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com.
That's this week's view.
From Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
You've been listening to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign with Steve Cubine and Ann McNamara, the podcast that celebrates amazing stories of Tinseltown from its golden era. Join us next week for another episode and learn something else about Hollywood you probably never knew. Take a moment and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review, and tell your friends about us too. It'll help grow the podcast. Visit Steve's website at FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com. The executive producers are Steve Cubine and Nan McNamara. Executive producer and post-production supervisor Lindsay Schnebley. Associate producer and researcher John Price Ritchie. This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows like The Box of Oddities and The Shallow End with Schnebley and Toth. Copyright 2025. All rights reserved. That's a wrap.